Hello and welcome to The Absolute Truth. I'm sure you've heard by now the absolutely amazing breaking news that occurred over the weekend, the commutation by Governor Jared Polis of American hero Tina Peters. Now, we will discuss that in the second half of today's show, so be sure to stay tuned for her attorney Peter Tickton as well as Ash Epps for more out of Colorado. Ash actually met with Tina over the weekend and we'll have a lot of exclusive information. But first, today we begin with Iran. Preeminent Iran expert Vali Nasser tweeted that, quote, there is more talk that the current impasse is unsustainable. And so U.S. and Iran could be back at war. But there is now a new Iranian proposal. Trump has another bite at the apple of a negotiated exit. This time, there is also the factor of what he heard and learned while in China. And towards that end, the president has apparently floated the prospect of at least temporarily ending the remaining sanctions on Iranian oil, even as the president insinuated that he's likely to resume attacking Iran soon. Is this the art of the deal at play, or is this merely desperation because the economic situation in the country is set to decline precipitously over the next several months due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? And just how helpful was the Trump-Xi summit last week in potentially ending the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz? To help us answer these questions is none other than the former CIA operations officer, as well as the senior editor of And Magazine on Substack, a very popular publication where national security insiders write about the most important threats to our nation. Welcome to the show, Mr. Sam Faddis. Sam, you have a recent article at And Magazine that I want to discuss in a moment. It was sent to me from one of those national security insiders who said, yes, this. So we'll get to that in a moment. But I do want to start with the developments as it relates to Iran. There was the Xi-Trump meeting last week. There's been some kind of, contradictory information that came out as to how successful it was, especially as it relates to Iran. What have you gleaned thus far, Sam? And good to see you.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me back. Look, I'm not going to be a ray of sunshine, unfortunately, on this topic. Mm-hmm. I did not come away from this summit in China with a good feeling or a good vibe on pretty much anything. I don't think the Chinese may say all kinds of things and blow all kinds of smoke in the course of a meeting. In terms of anything real, I don't expect them to do anything positive for us. In Iran, they think they've got us over a barrel. They think we got ourselves into a mess, which we did. And they are very happy right now to let us bleed. Now, at some point, does there need to be a resolution? Because yes, but in the meantime, I think they'll just extract their pound of flesh.
You know who told me not to trust China, Sam? Do you know who that person was? It was President Donald J. Trump himself.
Oh, okay.
In the first term, right? So I'm there with you on my skepticism as it relates to anything they promise to do, whether it's on Iran or whether it's on trade. And we know they discussed, the soybean issue. They discussed other trade mechanisms. We had an economist on the show last week. And he said, if we have any deal with China, we have to be better about some kind of enforcement mechanism, which we've just not been good with thus far, right? We've never really set up a viable enforcement mechanism when it comes to the Chinese. I think most people are where you are when it comes to Iran. And there has been, we'll hear something, right? We'll hear, we have a deal. We have a deal. The market opens on Monday morning. Usually the market spikes. Not always, but it usually does. And it seems like then we're back to bombing Iran. So Trump did say over the weekend, I believe it was Saturday, that he might start dropping bombs on Iran again. Perhaps this, as I said in the open, the art of the deal. But you seem to think that we're not through this and there will be more bombs.
Well, I don't think we are anywhere close to having a deal with the Iranians that we really would find acceptable. Okay, we could end the war anytime we want by effectively surrendering. But in terms of a deal we can live with, I don't think we're anywhere close. I think these guys believe that they are winning. From their perspective, this war was never about conventional combat. They never expected they could take on the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy. They made it all about holding a gun to the head of the world economy from the beginning by threatening oil and gas. And as it stands right now, they still think they have that leverage. Now, we're counting on the fact that we blockaded the straits. They're not selling oil, and that will force them to come to the table. Maybe eventually. I don't think on anywhere close to the timeline people want you to think, like it's a matter of weeks. I think the Iranians can hold out for months and months into the future. And look, they have smart boys and girls in this country who watch the news and read opinion polls and see what the vote was in Congress the other day, and they understand the political pressure on this administration with the midterms looming. So again, they think they can hold out longer than we can as it stands right now.
And as you said, you don't believe that China has a motivation to help to that end. Former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, however, begs to differ. Here's what he said about how the Chinese might help. Let's listen.
And I've got to tell you, to see the Chinese backing away from Iran after meeting with President Trump was a huge outcome of this. How did
summit. They back away from Iran?
Well, they said they agree. No nukes, no militarization of the Straits of Hormuz. And you can't be tolling the Straits of Gibraltar, Straits of Malacca, or the Straits of Hormuz because you see it as a source of revenue.
Now, according to the White House website, China agreed to address U.S. concerns about China's export controls on rare earth minerals going to the U.S. that will be used for weapons construction, also to purchase 200 Boeing airplanes from the U.S., the first such purchase since 2018, when the trade war kicked off, if you will, and Trump won. The purchase of $17 billion worth of agricultural goods for the next 3 years. That includes the soybeans that the farmers have been raising the red flag about. They promised to buy back last September, and they said that they will work with the U.S. regulators to lift sanctions on U.S. beef facilities and resume imports, of poultry from the U.S. Now, you also heard Mike Waltz there mention, not just the Strait of Hormuz, but the Straits of, say, Malacca, through which a lot of Chinese trade flows, right? Is that not some kind of motivation for them to help out in resolving or helping to Iran and the U.S. to come to some sort of deal? Because several people have warned that could be the next shoe to drop, blocking off the Strait of Malacca.
Yeah, well, look, let me be clear. I am not a hawk in the sense that I am looking for conflict with anybody. Having been to a number of wars, they are ugly, nasty, brutish things. And we ought to think a lot harder before we get into one, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm not for just, being macho and throwing your weight around. But the bottom line is, in this kind of political calculus, it is results and force and real leverage that matters. That's what matters to the Chinese. Not like somebody tweeted something or somebody put something up on Truth Social, right? The bottom line is, we're in a mess in Iran, and the Iranians are really twisting they're turning the screws on us. And on the broader calculus, the Chinese are very happy to let that happen. Okay, maybe they're going to buy some soybeans because they need them, and they might even buy the Boeing planes, although I'd really like to see the fine print in that deal. But at the end of the day, here's the bottom line. They think they are ascendant. They think they are gaining in power, and they think we are a declining power, and overall time is on their side. And I didn't see anything come out of this summit that changed that. So no, I don't. There's also this dimension that I'm sure you're well aware of, which is we're used to in the United States with the idea that you reached an agreement with somebody, signed a contract, and it actually meant something. It's not the norm in most of the world, particularly people like the Chinese and the Iranians. Okay, they said something. Unless you can make them do it, it doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day.
You're absolutely right. Very cultural differences there as it relates to, being honest, particularly with your enemy. Sam Faddis, a lot of what is going on in Iran, especially as we head into the summer season, has raised concerns for many Americans related to terrorism and how we as a nation are countering that terrorism. The Trump administration also put out the new counterterrorism strategy, of which you wrote about at your Substack and magazine, and that's what I wanted to get to next. This was actually flagged for me by, again, a national security insider who often also raises the alarm about a lack of actual counterterrorism strategy or counterintelligence apparatus within the intelligence community here in the United States. You know that we have the forces to deal with terrorism, right? But that identification, you write, is unfortunately the problem. Could you explain to our audience, kind of sum up your article here, but I would advise them to go read it on Ann Magazine Substack, and how you propose to deal with the lack of implementation, I would say, of countering the terrorism?
Well, the example I use in the article is, okay, let's imagine there's a terrorist cell in Brooklyn and they're getting ready to start hitting targets in New York City. When you find those guys and you know where they are and you've pinned them down, the task of getting rid of them is relatively simple. I don't mean to make that sound cavalier or to trivialize the role of that, but the bottom line is there's going to be 5 bad guys in a room, and yes, do we have the capacity to end that threat? Without question. The real trick is, who the heck are those guys? How do you even know they're here? What are they planning? How did you find them, et cetera? In other words, the intelligence is the key in that kind of war. And it's really old school, right? I mean, you can have gadgets and listening devices, and all of that is important. But the bottom line is, if you want to find bad guys in a terrorist cell, you got to have sources inside that terrorist organization to tell you what's going on. That's the whole game in the end. That's the only way you find them. That's really old school stuff, really hard-nosed stuff. And unfortunately, we have largely lost that capacity. We got huge organizations and 1 million flat screen computers and all kinds of people preparing PowerPoint presentations and all the gear in the world and giant contracts. And in terms of guys and gals who actually can go out in the street and do that old school, hard-nosed work, precious few left. So I'm all for the new counterterrorism strategy, actually. But the point of the article was to say, okay, that's great. Who's actually going to go do this? Who's going to crawl inside the ISIS cell in the United States and tell you where they are? And how are you going to do that? And I haven't seen any sign that we're making the necessary changes.
I liked how you close the article, and what you're saying here. You need to stop equating bigger budgets with results. You need to put people in charge at the key intelligence agencies who actually know their trade and empower them to do what is required to fix a broken system. And I'll just tell you a little anecdote of being a journalist. I was quite shocked in my early days of, covering intelligence more than I had previously. I was talking to, an FBI agent. So FBI on the China desk, and talking to her about certain things that were going on. And what I learned is that she was gleaning a large amount of her intelligence from the New York Times. She had no idea how to gather intelligence. And that absolutely terrified me. So is it that we're recruiting the wrong people because we're recruiting, Ivy League students or students from certain schools? Why do we not have these people, Sam?
In some cases, it's because we're recruiting the wrong people, absolutely. But also we have, the quote you just read kind of sums it up, obviously, is we have defaulted to building giant bureaucracies and huge budgets and focusing on tech gear and things that, by the way, major corporations get rich off of and bureaucrats build empires based on, and lost track of the trade. I mean, what in the business you call trade craft. And ultimately that comes down to finding a really eclectic group of individuals, men and women, who just have those skills. I mean, the discipline, the capacity to make connections, to operate in very ambiguous environments. Everything shades of gray. You don't ever really know anything for sure. I mean, these are the kinds of individuals. This is not something you can run like like a normal federal bureaucracy. Let's just look at your grade point average and all that, right? I mean, I always say for this kind of business, you don't want the guy with the 4.0 grade point average. You want the smart guy in the back of the class who's a little bored, who's already thinking about what he's going to do for summer vacation and the girl he's taking out tonight and playing a prank on his buddy. And, you know, I mean, this kind of guy who's a little, not a criminal, because you need people with morality, but somebody who's a little uncomfortable coloring within the lines all the time because you're recruiting them to go out in this very amorphous environment. You know, a federal bureaucracy naturally doesn't lend itself to that, right? They want everything to be something you could put down in a form. They don't even understand what I'm talking about when I'm saying these kinds of things.
Yeah, no, they definitely don't get it. And their minds just don't work that way. I love what you said. You see the guy that's already thinking about summer vacation and the girl he's going to go out with and pulling some kind of major prank on his way out. I think you're right. It's the guys from the 80s movies, right? Those characters, kind of some of those guys.
Look, you want the best case officer in a movie? Watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's Ferris Bueller is the quintessential guy you want doing this. The whole movie is an op that Ferris Bueller runs. That is my wife and I, my wife's career case officer as well, always say this Ferris Bueller is the ultimate case officer. He's the guy you need running operations like that.
There you go. Ferris Bueller. It's good to see you, Sam Faddis. Go to Substack and subscribe to And Magazine. Really amazing information there. Good to see you, Sam. Thanks so much.
Thank you.